Today we're going to check out this late 70s, early 80s General Electric alarm radio clock. This thing is a beast. I'm not quite sure of the model number yet. It is missing all of its tags underneath. They were peeled off. It's in very cruddy condition. There's paint splatter all over it. It's going to need a deep cleaning. This was a Goodwill find, and I found it interesting because of its classic design and trim. It does work. The clock works, the radio works. It does have some issues. We're missing some brushed aluminum trim on two buttons. I suspect there was some brushed aluminum trimmer on this tuning dial. This trim plate is loose. The dial screen is very cloudy. Here's a size comparison to a mid to late 80s GE clock radio. I'm going to put some power to this and test all its functions. We'll start with the radio. Dirty controls. These are really hard to move.
Give it up. They won't even tell us how much.
It's possible they get another. I'll tell you that. I've been highly optimistic. Last night I tweeted, in 1 year from February 7th is Super Bowl 50, and I'll see you there. Basically implying the Patriots will be there too.
People have paint ace.
Try AM.
Old. Yeah. I get where you're.
Is to make sure that you don't cancel that contract.
This unit easily comes apart in 3 pieces once you remove all the visible screws on the bottom. The very top of the case will lift up and off. On the top of the case we have the snooze button and the speaker. It's a 2-watt speaker, 12 ohm. Let's see if we can do something a little better for this. Maybe upgrade it. It appears to be lacking bass. I'm going to take a look at some things, see if there's a problem with the circuit or not. I suspect maybe some capacitors might be bad. There appears to be some soot or burn mark on this capacitor here. I imagine it's part of the power supply. It looks like the power supply and the clock circuitry are all on the same board. It could just be dust. It's not coming off that easy. So we'll be checking all its little friends in this vicinity to make sure there's nothing going on. Here is what your latter 80s radios look like and the build quality. Right away you can see the difference. Most notably, here's the display, which is just a display of some sort, or an LED 7-segment. Certainly not the tubes that come in the other piece. A wimpier speaker. It's just not as sexy as the other one. I'm just going to cut the speaker out of circuit. Probably going to replace this anyways. This will make it easier for me to continue taking this apart. And pull off the snooze button. And it just pushes up. Put these screws back where they go. Alright, so there's the top piece out of the way. Okay, now take off the dial. You get this piece off. See all the dust on the diffuser? That's probably why it wasn't as bright as it could be. Definitely dusty. We'll take this whole thing apart. We'll get to this plastic here and polish that down. Make this nice and clear. Soak this thing and get it clean. This is what we got left. I would say those switches need to be cleaned. Go ahead and pull these right off. There's probably a bad connection here with this lamp. So we'll clean up these contacts. Fix that. We'll clean all these switches out. Pull these boards right off. So here's that capacitor that I said looked burnt. After looking at the board, it has bad solder. You can see the capacitor lead is loose on here. See it? I don't know if this was a replacement and somebody didn't do a good job putting it in, or factory. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this capacitor and test it. The negative lead goes towards the tubes. Here's a look at the back of the tubes. These are ISE DG19E from Japan. They're probably around the mid to late 70s. One of my tubes, the flying lead, broke off the base of the tube. I ended up losing a small segment of my digit. What I did was I filed the tip of it to a point and I shoved it back into the glass part, and it did end up making contact, and so far it's it's holding. The only real fix for that is to replace the tube, which are almost impossible to find right now. Here's a look at my speaker hack. The original speaker sounded like crap. I ended up pulling it out, and when I took it apart, I found that dust had accumulated underneath the spider, which basically fell into the coil and started rubbing the coil. So what I did was I found a speaker out of a Realistic Optimus small speaker set. The speaker's smaller, it wasn't going to match up to the mounting bracket at all. What I did is I cut out the center of the original speaker, and the Optimus speaker landed right inside the bracket part of it. It nestled in there very nicely. It's tight. What I did was I cut out the original magnet, which you can see is much smaller. And when I did that, I found that I then had a clearance issue with the light box. I had to use a grinder and grind out as part of this light box right here to create room to clear the speaker. The new speaker has a much larger magnet on it. Obviously it sounds a lot better. But the problem was that on the back of this light box was the original light assembly for the dial. I actually mounted it inside the light box, and if we take a look in, we can see now the two lamps are mounted in the bottom part of the light box and moved forward to give clearance for the speaker. All the functions on this clock are controlled by this one chip, which interfaces directly with the VFD tubes on this clock. The model number of the chip is an MM5316, and I believe the date code is indicating that it's year 83 with the 39th week. That probably puts this clock around 1984-ish. The burn mark that I found on this Rubicon 220 UF capacitor, I believe, had something to do with the fact that it wasn't properly soldered in. The lead was actually loose. I believe it was making enough contact to make this thing work. But go ahead and solder that back in. I tested the capacitor. It tested a little high, but not enough for me to believe that it needs to be replaced. Another hack I performed was to remove this blue diffuser. I really think that the tubes accentuate the look of this clock. It definitely looks a lot cooler without it. They still have the dial glass in place over the tubes. I cleaned and lubricated all the switches thoroughly. They're now working perfectly. The scratchiness and the selections are a lot more accurate on them. The volume has no scratch in it. Tone works effortlessly. You can see the brightness. I was able to refabricate some of this brushed aluminum button covers on the top that were missing. I utilized a brushed aluminum picture frame that I got at the Goodwill for $1. I was able to cut it with scissors. It's fairly thin material. And then shape them with a file. And they match almost exactly. They look perfect. Unfortunately, I've not been able to find a piece of brushed aluminum large enough to replace what was missing on this tuner knob. So in the meantime, I just grabbed some chrome foil tape and cut out a circle and placed it in there. Eventually, if I can find a piece of brushed aluminum that I can work with, I'll go ahead and cut it out and put it in there. So here's my clock after a thorough cleaning and a few modifications. All the controls have been cleaned. The radio works awesome.
Gina is a poet and doesn't even know it.
Oh, please.
3232 to RSVP. Chip, that's Lincoln.
This thing has awesome FM reception. As we can see, all the paint droplets are off. Everything's shined up very nicely. I polished the dial glass. What makes this clock so cool is the 4 vacuum fluorescent display tubes that are inside.